Korud Prime was not the kind of planet anyone volunteered to visit. Its name was written in red across every Galactic Union chart with warning signs all around it. It was a place the universe had long abandoned, a planet wrapped in constant storms. Rivers of boiling acid beasts that hunted through vibrations and winds that could peel the metal off a transport ship, and yet, the Union had sent a team there hoping to extract data about energy sources buried beneath its crust, data that could power entire civilizations, but most of the team believed they were being sent to their deaths. Ship trembled as it entered the upper atmosphere shields, flaring under the pressure of magnetic storms. One of the alien engineers shouted coordinates, while another tried to stabilize the descent. Panic ran through the crew, their hearts pounding as lightning danced across the viewing screens. The air was heavy even before they touched the ground inside the cabin. The temperature rose and alarms blinked across the panels, but in the middle of this chaos, one figure stood calm, tall, wrapped in light gear with a rolled sleeping mat on his back and a quiet grin on his face. Human Ely had joined the expedition only a week before, barely speaking. To the rest of the crew, the aliens had looked at him with confusion, some with pity, thinking he must have misunderstood the mission or perhaps been forced into it, but Ely had shown no signs of fear. Instead, as the ship prepared to land, he leaned forward, watching the violent world below with the eyes of someone searching for a good spot to pitch a tent. When the ship finally landed, crashing into the soft, marsh-like soil with a groan of metal and steam hissing from its vents, the crew scrambled to activate their environmental suits and scan for toxins. But Ely walked down the ramp first, without hesitation, breathing through a basic filter and surveying the scene as if he were arriving at a vacation site. The sky was dark red, the clouds churned in endless spirals, trees with knife-like leaves twisted in the wind, and in the distance, something large and many-legged moved through the mist. The aliens remained in the ship's perimeter, activating drones and defensive barriers, setting up their research pods and temporary shelters. Their movements were quick and tight, filled with the tension of survival. They whispered to each other about the danger levels, about the probability of making it through the night. But when they looked toward Ely, they saw him crouched near a cluster of stones, examining the ground. His hands touched the soil. Then he stood, pulled a small shovel from his pack, and began digging a fire pit. One of the younger crew members asked him what he was doing. Ely smiled and replied, setting up camp. The answer confused them. They asked if he wanted help, if he needed armor or better tools. Ely waved it off, saying that he had camped in worse conditions on Earth. The name meant little to most of them, but something about the way he said it made them pause, as if Earth itself was the key to understanding him. As the evening approached, the wind picked up, shrieking like a living creature across the plains. Many of the team members retreated into the dome shelter. The temperature dropped violently, and acidic mist rolled in from the east. Sensors began flashing warnings. Ely, meanwhile, had managed to find shelter under a rock overhang, using a tarp to block the wind and a small heating unit. To warm the ground, he cooked something in a metal pan and ate quietly, watching the sky. The team leader, an older alien with blue skin and a scar across one eye, ordered a scan of the immediate region. The drones flew into the dark, scanning for movement, but the data came back confusing. The life forms here did not match known biology. They moved like shadows, vanished from scans, and appeared again in unexpected places. The terrain itself seemed to shift, almost like it was alive. Later that night, as the crew slept in their sealed pods, Ely remained awake, listening to the sounds around him, the screech of wind, the low growl of unseen beasts, the thrum of power beneath the soil. He did not look worried. Instead, he leaned back and whispered to himself something about how peaceful it was compared to camping in a desert back home, with sandstorms that could bury a car in minutes. By morning, the aliens emerged with stiff joints and tired eyes, only to find that Ely had been busy overnight. He had mapped a small perimeter, marked the safer paths, and even set up a water filter using materials from the ship's debris. He greeted them cheerfully, as if this were a training exercise, and offered them roasted meat from some creature he had apparently Hunted during the night, the others stared in disbelief, unable to understand how he was still standing. Tarn, one of the biologists, walked up to Eli and asked him directly how he was not scared, how he was still alive. Eli's answer was simple: Earth taught us to adapt, not just survive. He pointed at the sky and said that his ancestors had lived through ice, ages, jungle diseases, natural disasters, and wars, and all of that had been training for places like Korrid Prime. He said that fear was natural, but humans had learned to work with fear, not let it stop them. The words echoed in the mind of every alien standing there. They had come expecting to face a nightmare, and they were still right about that. None of them had expected that the human would treat it like a weekend adventure. Eli's presence changed something in the group. Where once there was panic, now there was curiosity. The others began asking him questions, watching his movements, following his lead, even if they did not fully understand him. Yet Korrid Prime remained a place of danger, but in the presence of the human who moved through it with the ease of a seasoned traveler, it began to feel just a little less impossible. And as the second day began and the winds howled again over broken hills and glowing rivers, the team found themselves stepping out of their fear and into something else, something like hope, or maybe just trust in the strange quiet strength of the one species that had learned long ago how to call chaos home. The second day on Korrid Prime began with a thunderquake that split the valley floor in two. The ground roared like a beast waking from a long sleep. Cracks opened wide enough to swallow a rover, and pillars of dust shot into the air. The alien crew scrambled in every direction, some trying to stabilize equipment, others shouting into comms, trying to confirm if the ship had been damaged or if there was another quake coming. But in the middle of all the panic, Eli stood calmly, his feet planted on the trembling ground, his eyes scanning the horizon, like a hiker watching the weather shift. Once the quake passed and the dust settled, Eli returned to work as if nothing unusual had happened. He gathered pieces of fallen metal, tied them with strong vine-like plants, and built a structure to shield his fire pit from the wind. He hunted a long insect-like creature that had venomous fangs and armor for skin, and turned it into food while the others inside the dome refused to step out or even eat properly, relying only on dried rations and nutrient packs inside the dome. Tarn watched Eli from behind the glass. He had been monitoring the atmosphere for changes in toxicity, but now he found himself more interested in the human's behavior than in the data. His colleagues discussed the readings while warning of another possible quake or the approach of a predator herd, but Tarn only stared outside, wondering how someone could treat a Deathworld like a backyard expedition. He finally stepped out of the shelter and approached Eli, carefully stepping around the heated stones and broken branches. He asked Eli directly, "How can you be so calm out here? Don't you understand how dangerous this planet is?" And Eli looked up from cleaning a blade and said, "I grew up in places where you either learn fast or you don't come home." He explained that in parts of Earth, the weather changes in seconds. Floods and fires arrive without warning. Wild animals break into homes, and people still go hiking, fishing, exploring because danger doesn't stop life. It teaches you how to live it better. Tarn listened quietly, surprised by the human's casual words, and then asked, "But this planet is different. It's not like Earth. It's alive in ways we don't understand. The beasts here don't behave normally. Even the plants react to movement." And Eli smiled a little as he tied a new knot in the trap he was building and said, "Maybe that's why I feel comfortable. It reminds me of Earth, but louder, bigger, angrier, like nature here has a megaphone and wants us to listen." By the third day, the alien team began to rely on Eli more than they admitted. He had found several routes through the hills that avoided the mud pits and sinkholes. He had mapped the movement patterns of a predator pack using simple marks carved into rocks. He had shown them a plant that secreted a thick gel which worked as a burn treatment, something their medical kits didn't even have a solution for yet. And when acid rain fell during a brief morning storm, Eli guided them to a natural cave and sealed the entrance with layered leaves that resisted corrosion inside that cave. While the storm screamed outside, the crew gathered around Eli, some watching him with curiosity, others with quiet respect. One of them, a communications officer, asked if all humans were like this, And Eli laughed and said, "Not all, but many where I come from. We have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and Earth is full of things trying to kill you every day." He talked about cold places where people build homes from ice deserts, where temperatures could melt plastic jungles where every insect could either bite, sting, or poison you, and how humans still lived there, raised families, built cities, went hiking on weekends as if it was just a challenge to be solved. The aliens listened as if hearing tales from an old legend, not believing everything, but drawn in by the certainty in his voice and the relaxed posture in his body. No armor, no heavy weapons, no fear. Eli carried only basic tools: a knife, a heating rod, a coil of rope, a solar light pack, and a cloth filter, and yet he was doing better than the rest of the team combined. That evening, while others were sorting samples and trying to recover lost equipment from the earlier quake, Eli returned from a solo trip, dragging the carcass of a creature longer than a transport vehicle, its jaws wide enough to bite through metal, and its eyes still glowing faintly. He had taken it down using bait and gravity, luring it off a cliff where it broke its spine on impact. The team stared in disbelief as he calmly began harvesting useful parts from its body and explained how its teeth could be sharpened into blades or tools, how its bones could be used for structural support or makeshift armor. Team leader finally spoke with Eli in private, asking how he knew how to do all this, and Eli replied that humans had always been like this, not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but because they were stubborn and curious, and willing to walk into danger just to see what was on the other side. He said that humans didn't run from wild places, they built homes. They tamed the land, named the beasts, and when they couldn't tame something, they learned to live beside it. The leader asked him why he had volunteered for this mission, and Eli answered, "I didn't come here for fame or money. I came because I wanted to see if Deathworlds were really that bad. Turns out they're not, they're just misunderstood." He looked out across the dark land where red lightning flashed behind twisted trees and added to me, "This is just another campsite. And like any good campsite, you clean up after yourself, you respect the wild, and you enjoy the view while you can." That night, as they sat around a small fire protected by a ring of stones and reflective panels, the crew began to relax just a little, their movements less sharp, their voices less tense. They shared stories from their home planets and listened as Eli spoke about his travels across Earth, the forests, the mountains, the storms, and the strange peaceful moments in between. And even though the world outside, the firelight, was still deadly, it no longer felt invincible. Accord Prime remained a death world. No less brutal, no less wild. But now the team had seen something else, something stronger than the beasts or the storms. The quiet resilience of a human who saw danger not as a threat, but as a challenge, and in doing so, made everyone around him feel just a little more capable, a little less afraid. The son of Korod Prime did not rise so much as burn through the choking clouds like a wound opening in the sky. Red light bled across the jagged hills, casting long twisted shadows over the alien terrain. And yet for Eli, it marked the start of another ordinary morning. He stepped out of the crude shelter he had built from scavenged parts and plant fibers, stretched his arms with a deep breath, and looked at the wild land as if checking the weather before a morning jog behind him. The rest of the team slowly emerged from their shelters, blinking into the strange daylight, their suits stiff, their movements cautious, their expressions still carrying the weariness of another night spent waiting for death to arrive through the walls. Eli had already cleaned his tools, packed a few supplies, and marked the safe trail. He planned to explore further that day while the scientists argued over readings and the engineers worried about their damaged comms. Eli took off into the jungle alone, his movements sure and easy, stepping between carnivorous roots and avoiding stalks that hissed with hidden poison. He moved like someone walking a familiar path, and the forest did not resist him. Perhaps because it sensed he was not trying to control it, only understand it. When he returned hours later, he brought with him not only samples of plants and minerals, but also a rough map etched into a strip of tree bark detailing the terrain and The movement patterns of local predators. The alien team gathered around in silence, watching. Eli explained with simple gestures where to walk, what to avoid, and where the earth felt hollow beneath your feet, as if warning you not to linger the sea. Map was not made with high-tech scanners or data grids. It was made with instinct, experience, and attention to nature itself. The team slowly began using Eli's advice more often, not because they fully trusted him yet, but because it kept them alive. A biologist avoided a nest of acid-spitting insects thanks to a rock formation. Eli had mentioned an engineer found a heat vent tunnel to charge equipment more safely than inside the exposed dome, and one of the guards used Eli's trap method to capture a scout beast that had been stalking the camp for 2 nights. The humans' methods were simple and low-tech, but they worked better than anything the aliens had brought with them that evening as the team sat together, eating strange roasted meat that Eli insisted was safe. The wind began to shift, and a distant rumble passed through the air, not the sound of thunder, but something deeper, heavier, as if the very bones of the planet were grinding together. The lights on their equipment flickered, small stones began to vibrate, and the animals in the trees vanished into silence. The team stood alert, weapons raised, scanners flaring with confused signals. Then from the edge of the jungle they came, dozens of creatures, some taller than the rover itself, their bodies armored in thick plates, eyes glowing with hunger. They moved fast despite their size, crashing through the undergrowth like waves of living metal. The defense systems activated automatically, energy barriers sparked to life, weapons fired, but the beast did not stop. Their claws tore through steel. Their roars shook the camp, and within moments, the dome's outer wall was breached. Panic spread, orders were shouted, but the noise drowned everything, and in the chaos, one of the command crew was injured, pulled back only at the last moment by a brave medicine. That moment of confusion when even the most seasoned crew members froze. Eli ran straight into the danger, not with a gun, but with a flare and a pouch of powder made from crushed fruit seeds he had discovered days ago. He threw the mixture into the air, and the bright flash and strange scent confused the creatures for just long enough to drag the wounded leader to safety. Then he shouted to the others not to fight, but to follow him into the forest. The decision was insane. No one ever ran toward the jungle on Korrid Prime. It was considered suicide. But something in Eli's voice and the confidence of his steps pulled them forward one by one. Crew followed, abandoning equipment, leaving behind gear and samples just to stay alive. Eli led them down a narrow ravine, barely visible to the scanners, and then through a gap in the rocks that led to a series of hidden caves formed by lava long ago. The predators did not follow, not because they couldn't fit, but because the cave reeked of sulfur and something older, deeper, something the beasts feared. And Eli had known this from the moment he smelled it days earlier while exploring alone inside the caves. The crew caught their breath. Some fell to the ground shaking, others whispered prayers in their native tongues. The leader, whose arm was torn and bleeding, looked at Eli with disbelief, not just for saving him, but for knowing where to go. How to move through the planet like it was a place he had lived all his life. The aliens asked him how he knew these places, and Eli said, "I listened. The planet tells you where to go, if you stop fighting it long enough to hear it." They rested for a while, and Eli tended wounds using sap from a glowing moss that worked better than their first aid kits. He used smooth stones to apply pressure, made splints from nearby roots, and wrapped them in bark soaked in natural antiseptic. He moved with purpose, not just to survive, but to help. And it became clear that he was not just strong, he was useful. He was observant. And when he spoke, even the most skeptical among them now listened. After some time, when the tremors stopped in the air outside, calmed, Eli scouted ahead and returned with news of a path that would lead them around the predator nest back toward the southern plateau, where the extraction beacon was located. But the terrain was rough, volcanic, and unstable, and their equipment was mostly gone. The crew hesitated until Eli looked at them and said, "We're not going back. We're going through because we don't have time to be afraid anymore." There was no vote, there was no debate, only silent agreement and tired nods as they packed what little they had, and followed Eli once again into the unknown. The crew who had once called him reckless now saw something different. A leader born not from rank or training, but from instinct and resilience, from the quiet knowledge that survival was not about power or luck. It was about being willing to understand the world, even when it wanted to kill you. As they moved through the cracked valley, where smoke rose from the ground and the wind howled between broken cliffs, they followed not just Eli's path, but his mindset, each step no longer filled with hesitation, but with purpose. And though the night ahead promised new dangers, there was now a sense among the group that they were not just running from death, they were learning to live with it, to move beside it, and to find strength in its shadow. The path through the volcanic valley stretched ahead like the spine of some ancient creature, black stone cracked under every step, and the air was heavy with heat and the scent of burning minerals. The crew moved slowly, sweat mixing with dust and fatigue dragging at their limbs, but Eli remained at the front, his eyes scanning the ground, noting small details in the shifting terrain, reading the mountain like an open book. He walked with purpose, his hands steady, his pace measured, like a man on a familiar trail, not a stranger in a hostile world. Behind him the rest followed, some limping, some leaning on each other, still shaken from the attack and the narrow escape. The team leader was still too weak to walk far, so 2 crew members shared his weight, each step difficult, yet none complained, because each of them had seen what waited back in the jungle, and they knew Eli's path was their only chance of making it out alive. Eli stopped briefly near a cluster of steaming rocks, bent down and pressed his palm to the ground. He felt the vibration just beneath the surface, a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the planet. He closed his eyes, focused, then pointed to the right. "We go around this slope," he said. "The rock is hollow beneath. It might collapse under too much weight." One of the aliens asked how he could possibly tell that, without instruments, and Eli answered, "Earth has volcanoes too. The ground talks. If you know what to feel for, and sometimes staying alive means listening, not looking." As they moved around the slope, a small quake hit. Loose stones tumbled from above. Dust clouds rose in thick waves, but the path held, just as Eli predicted. After a while, the crew no longer questioned his decisions. When he said stop, they stopped. When he said go, they moved. When he paused and knelt beside strange markings on a stone wall, they waited without asking what he saw, because by now they had learned that every choice Eli made came from a place of knowing, not guessing. Hours passed. The sky above remained the same, swirling red and black clouds throwing strange shadows across the cliffs. The temperature shifted wildly, hot bursts of wind followed by sudden chilling gusts. Yet Eli adapted without pause, adjusting clothing, changing pace, teaching the others how to use local plants for cooling or warmth, using wide leaves to make head covers, building small shade structures with fallen branches. When they rested, it wasn't for comfort, but to prepare for the next stretch, because survival was no longer about escaping. It was about enduring with intention. At one point they reached a narrow pass, blocked by a fallen rock slide. The path beyond was the only route to the plateau. Eli studied it, then looked around, spotting vines with thick roots growing along the cliff walls. He climbed without a rope, using only his hands and feet, driving small spikes into the stone where needed. Within minutes, he reached a higher ledge, secured a line, and began pulling others up one by one. Even the injured were lifted with care. No machine, no lifter, just hands, rope, and human willpower that refused to quit. That night they found shelter in a rock alcove, high above the valley floor. From there, they could see the dark forest behind them, glowing faintly with the bioluminescent eyes of hunting beasts. They could also see flashes of blue light far in the distance near the extraction zone. Their beacon was still active, but storms circled the area violently. Eli studied the sky for a long time, saying nothing. The wind hissed through the stones, but he didn't flinch, just watched and waited, as if trying to read the storm's next move. Inside the alcove, the crew rested, built a fire from dried mosses and bones, shared food and water, rationed carefully, even joked quietly about how they would tell their story when they returned. Some said no one would believe them. Others said the Union would probably recruit more humans after this mission, Because clearly no one else was built for this kind of madness, Tarn sat beside Ayla, watching him shape arrowheads from predator teeth, and finally asked what he was really doing here. Not just the mission, but this place, this planet, this moment. Eli answered, I came because I wanted to know if all the stories were true, the ones that say humans are monsters, that we survive everything, that we never die even when we should. And now, I know they weren't wrong, but they weren't fully right either. We're not strong because we want to fight. We're strong because we never stop moving. We adapt because we have to, not because we like it. Just before dawn, the wind picked up again, stronger than before. Eli stood and looked out over the plateau. The storm was moving faster, circling the beacon site with blinding speed. Lightning split the clouds in long horizontal lines. Strange particles in the air made the flashes linger like ghosts. He turned to the group and said, we can't wait for the ship to land in that mess. We need to be there when the storm breaks, because they'll only get one window to pick us up, and if we miss it, we won't get another. Some of the crew hesitated, not from fear, but from uncertainty. They were exhausted, low on supplies, and the terrain ahead was worse than anything they had crossed so far. But Eli's voice held no room for doubt. He pointed toward the ridge and laid out the plan. They would move in shifts, use natural cover to cross the flatlands, create decoys to draw away predators, and use smoke signals to guide the ship through. The safest path. He had already drawn the layout in the dirt, with pieces of bone and stone, his mind calculating distance, time, wind direction, even the likely behavior of the local wildlife. And so they moved again, just as the storm's edge reached the ridge. They slipped down into the dark ravines, moving like ghosts between rock pillars and steam vents. Ayla led with silence, using hand signals to guide the group around nests of sleeping creatures and past acid pools that bubbled with hidden gas. The closer they got to the beacon, the louder the wind screamed, until it felt like the planet itself was trying to push them back. But they didn't stop, because behind them was death, and ahead of them was only a chance. And that was enough. They reached the beacon crater just as the first ship came into range. The clouds tore open with sound and fury, the extraction team shouting over comms, barely able to hold position. Eli lit the smoke markers, guiding the ship through a narrow gap in the rocks, while the others created a perimeter, using shields and reflectors to block flying debris. A second quake struck during the landing, but Eli stood firm, holding the signal line until the very last person was aboard, and then finally climbed in, himself soaked in sweat, covered in dust, eyes sharp and steady as the ship lifted away, leaving Korred Prime behind. The crew sat in silence, not because they were too tired to speak, but because they had nothing left to say. The mission had changed them, not just because of what they had seen, but because of what they had learned from one human who treated Deathworlds not as death sentences, but as places to grow stronger, to think differently, to survive without losing yourself. The transport ship rose higher above Korred Prime, leaving behind the glowing red clouds, the twisting forests, the burning rivers, and the broken valley where the ground still trembled from deep within. The storm had passed, but its memory remained painted in every scar across the land and marked in every silent breath the crew took as they stared down through the thick glass of the observation deck. They had survived something the galaxy had called impossible, and none of them could explain how except by glancing toward the quiet figure standing alone near the back. Eli leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable, eyes focused not on the planet, but on the stars beyond. Eve had not said much since they lifted off, just nodded at the pilot, offered help where needed, and returned to silence while the rest of the crew celebrated, whispered, laughed, cried. Ayla remained still, as if his mind was still on the ground, still listening to the wind, the crack of lava beneath his feet, the movement of unseen predators in the trees, the rhythm of survival that had filled his chest since the moment he stepped off the ship days ago, and even now part of him had not let it go. The team leader sat nearby, wrapped in bandages, his arm in a sling. Voice still weak but filled with certainty, he turned to Tarn, who had begun recording mission logs, and said, we owe everything to him. No one disagreed, not even the most senior officers, who once dismissed Eli as untrained or reckless, now watched him with Something closer to awe. They knew now that rank and status had meant little on Korrid Prime. What had mattered was instinct, grit, and the strange human ability to treat even the worst situations as just another challenge to overcome. As the ship moved into safer orbit, the Union command hailed them. A hologram lit up in the center of the deck, faces appearing with shocked expressions, relief washing over them. As they realized the mission team was alive, the leader began explaining the situation. The failure of equipment, the ambush by native creatures, the loss of supplies, and the storm that nearly wiped them out. But then, he stopped and simply said, "We survived because of one man," and stepped aside, letting the camera catch a glimpse of Eli, still leaning quietly in the back. The commanders asked questions. What kind of tech did he use? How did he detect predators without scanners? How did he cross lava fields without drones? And how did he organize a full team retreat with no communication links? But Tarn simply answered he didn't need tech. He used his senses. He watched, he listened, and the planet spoke to him. And when they asked how this was possible, the engineer replied, "Because he is human, and humans see danger differently. They don't run, they adapt." News spread quickly across the Union channels. Stories titled "Survivor of the Deathworld, the Human Tracker." The legend of Korrid began appearing even before the ship landed, and when they finally arrived at the main station, a crowd was already waiting. Scientists, commanders, press officers, trying to catch a look at the man who walked through a storm and made it back. Ele walked past them without a word, carrying only a worn satchel and his hand-carved map. The rest of the team followed, giving interviews, answering technical questions, describing the creatures and the terrain, but always returning to the same point. Without him, we would not be here. Later in the debriefing room, a senior official offered Eli a medal, a formal recognition of courage and leadership. He stared at it for a moment, then nodded slowly and said, "Thank you, but I didn't do it for medals. I did it because someone had to, and because the planet wasn't the problem. The problem was that no one tried to understand it. The others build walls. I just built a fire and listened." That answer was recorded, played across hundreds of Union channels, and sparked a new conversation, not about the dangers of Deathworlds, but about the possibility of learning from them. In the weeks that followed, more humans were assigned to exploration missions. Some volunteered after hearing the story. Others were chosen specifically for their survival. Records their ability to adapt, think fast, and act with limited tools. They began pairing with alien scientists, not as bodyguards, but as guides and teachers, sharing stories of Earth's wilderness, the blizzards, the deserts, the deep oceans, and the quiet patience it took to live in balance with nature. Eli himself was offered command of a new expedition, this time not to extract samples, but to help design long-term camps on unstable worlds, places once considered lost causes now seen as frontiers. He accepted the offer, but on one condition. He wanted no tech teams, no heavy weapons, no machines. Just a small group of mixed species, and a world no one else wanted. And when asked why, he said, "Because surviving is not enough. We need to live out there, and to live you have to understand, not control." The new mission began months later, this time on a different world, colder, darker, with deep caverns and floating rock fields. The crew again included scientists, engineers, and a few curious officers. But it also included trainees from different races who had read the report on Korrid Prime and wanted to learn from the human who turned chaos into shelter. Eli trained them not with lectures, but with walks through storms, as silent moments near predator nests, and the gentle reminder that the world is not trying to kill you, it is trying to exist, and if you listen, you might find a place in it. Back on the station, the memory of Korrid Prime remained not just in reports and recordings, but in a change of thinking. Planets marked red were no longer seen as immediate death sentences, but as wild lands waiting for respect, not conquest, and the phrase "humans treat Deathworlds like camping trips" became something more than a joke. It became a truth, whispered by those who had seen it and lived it, and now believed that, maybe, just maybe, these strange, stubborn creatures from Earth held the key to opening new paths in the stars. Ailey remained the same, quiet, steady, eyes always on the horizon. He Did not chase fame, he did not give long speeches, he simply moved forward one step at a time, carrying with him the tools of a camper, the mind of a student, and the heart of a survivor, and in every storm, in every cave, and every place where others saw only death, he saw something else. He saw life waiting to be understood, and so the story of Korid Prime came to an end, not with explosions or glory, but with survival, with growth, and with the quiet proof that sometimes the strongest force in the galaxy is not the one that destroys, but the one that endures, learns, and adapts. The end.